With its boundless variety of scenic beauty, the North American West has long served as a reliable source of inspiration for those with a creative soul, like this talented artist from North Idaho. An avid outdoorsman, Mike Schneider's creative soul is cleverly etched, scorched, and welded, so eventually it shines through his extraordinary artwork made from metal.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I had retired from the telephone company here locally and out of the Coeur d'Alene area, and I was going to build houses. Well, of course, the housing industry kind of went on a slump here, and out of boredom, one day I went out to my shop and made a picture. In fact, it's that grizzly bear. And my oldest daughter, who lives in Portland, she came home and took a look at that, and she's artsy herself, and she said, you know, Dad, you really need to go downtown and look in the galleries and see what metal art looks like. And my daughters, which I've got 3, and my wife, have been my inspiration ever since.
As an art medium, working with raw metal is near the top of the list in terms of difficulty. Yet for Mike Schneider, it's a skill he's always been comfortable with. In fact, one could argue it's in his DNA.
Well, actually, my grandfather was a blacksmith, and metal was always in our family. And the one thing that always intrigued me was any time that you cut or weld metal, there is a heat signature left alongside of that. And that heat signature is the colors that I try to produce in my artwork. I try to use those colors like a canvas painter uses paint. You know, you can't duplicate the colors of the real things all the time, but I like to try to use the natural colors that come out of different types of metals from different kinds of heat, grinding methods that'll reflect the light differently. And I think I'm still learning a great deal every time I do a piece.
The ability to take a cold, flat chunk of metal and transform it using a variety of tools into an inviting, colorful, three-dimensional piece of art is a process that requires the melding of imagination with strong hands and an eye for detail.
Well, everything I do is self-taught, basically, other than what I learned, you know, in schools as a kid. But to begin with, almost all of the metal anymore is recycled metal. So I start by cleaning everything totally off with a grinder. I make the whole thing shiny. And then once I've ground the metal down, I'll lay it down flat and shine the light on it, because you can't always tell where all the scratches and blemishes and things in the metal are. And believe you me, they show up sooner or later. But once you get it down to where it's clean, what I generally do is do the etching on the metal. I like to put the depth and dimension into a flat piece of metal with a grinder and grinding techniques.
Once Mike has etched out a suitable background for a piece, his next step is to draw color out from the metal, which means turning up the heat.
When I build a piece of work that's large, there is no heat treating part of it. You have to heat treat the whole thing. And the metal jumps and crawls all over the place when I'm doing it, and you got to chase the cold spots out of the metal while you're doing it so it doesn't warp the metal. The torch takes a lot of practice, because a lot of the colors you have to stop before they appear. So you have to know how hot and what colors are coming out of that metal and when to stop, because a piece of steel turns about 4 different colors, and there's varying shades of those colors. Sometimes you learn to live with the color that comes out, and sometimes you don't. It's got to start over. But the colors are cool.
Something else that's cool is the 3D look Mike tries to incorporate into many of his art pieces. To achieve this effect, objects such as trees and animals are cut out with a plasma torch, polished with a grinder, and then attached in layers with a spot welder.
I like the fact that the three-dimensional aspect of a lot of the work really pleases people. It makes them feel like they can kind of almost step into this piece and smell the trees or something.
Given the demanding nature of metal, Mike knows that once he begins a piece, he must stay on task until it's complete, or at least ready to leave the shop.
When I build a piece of work, I bring it in the house after I think it's to a completion stage, and I'll set it up on my hearth. So I have to look at this thing constantly, and that's where I scrutinize them. And there's been a few of them went back to the shop and got totally tore apart. And of course, my biggest critic is probably my wife, also my biggest fan. But when we can both sit and look at a piece for a week or two and enjoy it for that long, that says a lot.
These days, out in front of the Schneider home is a Tin Man. It's a novelty piece, to be sure, but in many ways it also stands tall as a tribute to Mike Schneider's journey from being just a metal worker to becoming an accomplished metal artist.
I try to achieve creating the most beautiful piece of metal work that people see. I don't care if it's an abstract or if it's a conventional piece of artwork or whatever it is. I like to try to use that metal look, the reflectivity of metal, and the colors that I can get out of metal to achieve something that people have never seen before. And I guess that's what the inspiration to keep going is. And I think it's important for anybody who's going to call themselves an artist to do what you think is right. I mean, it's quite obvious when you look at all the different forms of art, there really is no right and wrong. It's an expression of what you do. And if you can do something to the point where it touches people, then you're an artist.
With its boundless variety of scenic beauty, the North American West has long served as a reliable source of inspiration for those with a creative soul, like this talented artist from North Idaho. An avid outdoorsman, Mike Schneider's creative soul is cleverly etched, scorched, and welded, so eventually it shines through his extraordinary artwork made from metal.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I had retired from the telephone company here locally and out of the Coeur d'Alene area, and I was going to build houses. Well, of course, the housing industry kind of went on a slump here, and out of boredom, one day I went out to my shop and made a picture. In fact, it's that grizzly bear. And my oldest daughter, who lives in Portland, she came home and took a look at that, and she's artsy herself, and she said, you know, Dad, you really need to go downtown and look in the galleries and see what metal art looks like. And my daughters, which I've got 3, and my wife, have been my inspiration ever since.
As an art medium, working